If you had to pick one author whose writing is crucially important at this moment in time, either to you personally or to the whole pro-democracy resistance, who would you pick? Would you pick a historian, a general, a philosopher, a religious scholar, a sociologist? For me, hands down, easy choice, I would pick Rebecca Solnit. Particularly because I believe it's not actually so much what the regime tries to do, it is very much how we decide to respond, how we choose to act. And our hope dramatically shapes our actions. The future is unknown. We get to help shape that future. Our hope helps shapes us and our actions that then shape the future. And nobody writes about hope in a way that is more nuanced and more accurate and more important than Rebecca. If you've not seen part 1, please go back and watch it. It's the video right before this one. But here, I want to take a moment, and I'm quoting from Rebecca's book, Hope in the Dark, and also from a piece that the Marginalian put out in 2016. Rebecca's work is of crucial import, but also important is Maria Popova of the Marginalian, really, really inspired by her writing. Earlier today, I had to go take one of my kids to the Amtrak station so they could take the train back to college after being here for the weekend for a mock trial tournament. She's a poli-sci major and she's taking this non-Western poli-sci class. So of course she's talking to me about political movements in the East. She was saying, I think people in the United States have this kind of warped perception. They read about some movement in another country, some movement in the past, and it feels very compressed to them. And they often miss the fact that these social movements, these political movements, can take years and years, can take decades. They can take the leader of that political movement on an arc that covers their entire life. And that we often see the culmination of their movement, that moment when they shifted history, but we often don't necessarily take the time to appreciate how long that buildup was, how long it took the movement to gain people power, to hone their strategy, and how long it actually took them to enact change. And Popova, the Marginalian, discusses how Solnit addresses this in her book as well. She says, Solnit sprouts a micological metaphor for this imperceptible incremental buildup of influence and momentum. Y'all know that I'm a big mycology nerd and an avid amateur mushroom hunter. I live in the Pacific Northwest, which is just like the best place to go mushroom hunting. And so I really appreciated this metaphor from Rebecca. She says, after a rain, mushrooms appear on the surface of the earth, as if from nowhere. Many do so from a sometimes vast underground fungus that remains invisible and largely unknown. What we call mushrooms, mycologists call the fruiting body of the larger, less visible fungus. Uprisings and revolutions are often considered to be spontaneous, but less visible long-term organizing and groundwork, or underground work, often laid the foundation. Changes in ideas and values also recruit from work done by writers, scholars, public intellectuals, social activists, and participants in social media. It seems insignificant or peripheral until very different outcomes emerge from transformed assumptions about who and what matters, who should be heard and believed, and who has rights. Ideas at first considered outrageous or ridiculous or extreme gradually become what people think they've always believed. How the transformation happened is rarely remembered, in part because it's compromising. It recalls the mainstream when the mainstream was, say, rabidly homophobic or racist, in a way it no longer is. And it recalls that power comes from the shadows and the margins, that our hope is in the dark around the edges, not the limelight of center stage. Our hope and often our power. I love this because in permaculture, one of our principles is to use the edges and value the marginal, to see hope as something that exists in the margins, in the dark, just out of reach, in the uncertain, unknowable future. That is where our hope resides. That, to me, I think, is such an important reminder of the truth of where hope resides and how we can be reaching for it, how we can utilize it, and also it's that important reminder to use the edges and value the marginal, not looking in the limelight of center stage for our solutions. Look to the people who've been pushed to the margins and historically excluded from the conversations. They have the ideas and the perspective that not only can provide hope, but can help bring about change. It's the people on the margins who the system has neglected and not invested in. It's the ideas on the fringe. It's the places we are not inclined to look first, the places that are unlikely. I really appreciate that Rebecca reminds us there resides our hope and our power. I don't know if Rebecca is somebody who has studied permaculture or knows the 12 principles, but for me, so much of her writing meshes so beautifully with the 12 principles. She goes on to say here, change is rarely straightforward. Sometimes it's as complex as chaos theory and as slow as evolution. Even things that seem to happen suddenly arise from deep roots in the past or from long dormant seeds. In permaculture, one of our principles is slow, small solutions. Our small actions can have ripple effects, can influence people we will never see, will have consequences that we will never know, but those small actions are still of great importance. Likewise, having patience and understanding that change is not brought about quickly. In permaculture, we often think of those snap decisions as being ones that fail to take into account all of the nuance, all of the details. When we make quick decisions, we often make decisions that are far more flawed, far less resilient, far more brittle than if we slow down. We take the time to carefully plan and organize. We observe and interact, taking the time to observe what's really happening so that we can carefully hone our plans so that they will produce the outcome, they will germinate the seeds that we are planting. And when we're thinking of slow, small solutions, how victory doesn't come quickly, it also comes incrementally. It doesn't mean that there is one fight and then the fascists just lay down. It doesn't mean that we win one court case and this is all over. It doesn't mean that there's the midterm elections and magically we go back to normal. We'll have victories and we'll have setbacks. It's understanding that we honor, we value, we celebrate every single victory along the way. No matter how small, it is important. It is part of that forward progression. It is part of that building our cumulative power. And Popova talks about Solnit addressing this fact as well. She says, and yet Solnit's most salient point deals with what comes after the revolutionary change, with the notion of victory not as a destination, but as a starting point for recommitment and continual nourishment of our fledgling ideals. It's this idea that there really is no finish line. There is no one final victory. Solnit says, a victory doesn't mean that everything is now going to be nice forever, and we can therefore all go lounge around until the end of time. Some activists are afraid that if we acknowledge victory, people will give up the struggle. I've long been more afraid that people will give up and go home or never get started in the first place if they think no victory is possible or fail to recognize the victories already achieved. Marriage equality is not the end of homophobia, but it's something to celebrate. A victory is a milestone on the road, evidence that sometimes we win, and encouragement to keep going, not to stop. Americans are good at responding to crisis and then going home to let another crisis brew. 2020 election, anybody? Both because we imagine that the finality of death can be achieved in life, it's called happily ever after in personal life, and saved in politics, and because we tend to think political engagement is something for emergencies rather than, as people in many other countries have imagined it, as a part and even a pleasure of everyday life. The problem seldom goes home. Going home seems to be a way to abandon victories when they're still delicate, still in need of protection and encouragement. Human babies are helpless at birth, and so perhaps are victories before they've been consolidated into the culture's sense of how things should be. I wonder sometimes what would happen if victory was imagined not just as the elimination of evil, but the establishment of good. If after American slavery had been abolished, Reconstruction's promises of economic justice had been enforced by the abolitionists. It's always too soon to go home. Most of the great victories continue to unfold, unfinished in the sense that they are not yet fully realized, but also in the sense that they continue to spread influence. A phenomenon like the civil rights movement creates a vocabulary and a toolbox for social change used around the globe so that its effects far outstrip its goals and specific achievements and failures. I'll conclude here. Solnit says it's important to emphasize that hope is only a beginning. It's not a substitute for action, only a basis for it.